I want to have a look at the voice in Australia, because we haven't really touched on this at all. And I've had lots of people saying to me, what's it all about? I found this from The Guardian, a little 2-minute explanation of the voice. This was previous or prior to the voice. Right. So
this is excellent.
Let me just give this to you in 2 minutes so everybody knows what we're talking about. And we're not actually talking in depth about the voice, because we're going to go from this and talk about ACT wanting to hold a referendum on the treaty.
Australians will soon vote in a referendum on whether to establish an Indigenous voice to Parliament. All Australians will be able to vote yes or no on October the 14th. The successful yes vote would recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia's constitution and lead to the creation of an Indigenous body to advise the government and Parliament on laws and policies affecting Indigenous people.
Sound familiar, New Zealanders? Like the context of it sound a little bit familiar? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but familiar?
First Nations people in Australia have faced a long and painful history of colonisation and dispossession. Compared with the rest of the Australian population, Indigenous people often experience the worst outcomes in health, employment, education and incarceration rates. Efforts to close the gap between Indigenous Australians and the rest of the country have consistently failed, and supporters of the voice say it will improve the lives of First Nations peoples. Australia's Labor government and other Indigenous groups are leading the campaign to establish the voice. They want the voice written into the Constitution so it can't be abolished when the government changes, as has happened with other advisory groups in the past. The federal opposition Liberal Party is opposed to establishing the body, saying it wouldn't alleviate the issues facing First Nations communities.
Okay, it wouldn't alleviate facing First Nation. So it's like, it's not going to do anything. Nothing to help these people.
They also claim it could divide the nation.
Oh, it could bring division. Notice how the right so often talks about division whilst they're dividing. Has anyone else picked up on that? How they talk about we need to be together. This is what I remember from working at ZB, a bastion of white middle class talkback. When people say we need to be together, we need to stop division, what they're saying is you need to be like me. That's how we get together. You need to be like me, and then we can be together. So it's evident within, migrants to a country that the locals, normally the white locals, will say, hey, people from Japan, people from China, people from South America, be like us. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. There's 3 ways you can become together. They can become like us, you can become like them, or together we can grow into something else. Mm-hmm. And obviously that together we can grow into something else is what's defined, I guess, as a multicultural country. But so often when people talk about division, it's like when people talk about balance. Bring balance to news. What they're saying is say what I want you to hear. When those on the right say stop the division, what they're saying is be like us. And it's not how the world goes. Because sure as fuck those people 150 years ago coming over here weren't being like the Indigenous people. They weren't being like the people who were already there. They brought their own culture with them. And they brought their own thoughts with them. And they wanted to live like that. So why should we expect anything from any migrant right now? And finally on this, it is a bandwagon of mine, finally on this, if you want someone to be a part of your community, whether it's a Indigenous New Zealander, whether it's a migrant to the country, whether you are the Indigenous community and it's European New Zealanders or whatever, what you do is you open your door and you let them come to you. You invite them in. You don't shout at them metaphorically from across the road and you say, be like us, and slam your front door. You bring them into community. Mm-hmm. And when I hear people like this saying, it'll bring division, the right in Australia, what they're saying is, we're creating division and this will add to it anyway. It's ludicrous. Before I push play to it, do you want to pick up on any of that?
Okay, so we see here a lot of talk about racism and division and things going backwards, or maybe things aren't going forwards quick enough. And it's terrible. Then we get Australia's attempt at doing something. And you go, oh shit. Oh fuck, that's really bad. I think it was up until the 1950s or 1960s or something, Aboriginal people were classed as fauna over there. It is just through a lens that is just a bizarro. It's just mad. And to see, like what we were talking about, right? Aussies are normal people,
Yep.
just doing their day to day. They're
Yep.
not
Ordinary people.
evil.
Yep.
But here they decided that we don't want to let Aboriginal people that have been here for 40,000 years, have any say in our form of government. That's crazy.
So, yeah, spoiler alert,
Absolutely
Chewy's already given out the results if you weren't quite aware of that. But let's just get to the end of this definition of what the voice is.
Some Indigenous people and groups also oppose the voice. They're pushing for a treaty to set out the terms of their relationship with the Australian government. There's a lot of information out there about the voice. It can be confusing and hard to work out what's going on. The official yes and no pamphlets have been published online by the Australian Electoral Commission, but it's important to know they haven't been fact-checked by an independent source. This is an important vote, and it's vital we take the time to consider our vote and what it will mean for the future of the country.
So, long story short, yes would mean, First Nations, Indigenous people, Aborigines would be officially kind of a part of the government process for making decisions, would consult to the government would seek their advice on it, I don't know if it's exactly the same as New Zealand, but you can hear some similarities going on there. 60% said, nah. 60% of Australians that voted, nah, we don't want that. And it didn't pass. Now, speaking of that...
How hurtful. You're an Aboriginal person in Australia. How hurtful would that be?
Yeah.
The people that you live with, work with, like Jesus.
So New Zealanders may have an opportunity to have their say. I guess I'm just using terminology that those who are proposing this are saying, to have a referendum on the treaty, whatever the fuck that means. And there was an interaction between Ryan Bridge and David Seymour and Chloe Swarbrick about it this morning. Chewy, earlier when you talked about if this referendum went through, you could imagine scenes like from 1981, scenes from the Springbok tour. When you think about that, I think about people in motorbike helmets, and I think about police officers with batons. That's a violent situation. Over the weekend, James Shaw made some comments about this, and that's the point where we start this conversation between Ryan Bridge and Chloe Swarbrick.
Chloe, let's talk about this referendum on the treaty principles that David is proposing. Your leader, James Shaw, has said that this could lead to violence. It could lead to social unrest. Do you agree with him?
I mean, we've discussed this on the couch before, right? On the fact that putting forward a kind of quite reductive binary on ultimately what is a sophisticated and quite complex constitutional conversation and question can ultimately result in triggering some quite untoward rhetoric. So I do think, and we've said this before as well in discussion on this couch, that there is the need to have a discussion about our constitutional future and our past, but I don't think that this referendum proposal is the right way to do it.
David, James Shaw says this could lead to violence. John Tamahere from the Māori Party says it could lead to cities being shut down, widespread civil unrest, and the closing down of major centres in New Zealand.
Now, just before, I'm not going to stop this playing. Okay, keep going, but Chewy, you described it as you could imagine it being 1981 Springbok Tour type protests. When Ryan Bridge says the words that John Tamahere said, that's what happened in 1981. So you might be spot on. Now, is that good, bad, or indifferent? I don't know, but more than one person are thinking this is not going to be good for New Zealand. Of course, Rimmer responds by saying,
well, I mean, you expect it from John Tamahere. He is unhinged and irresponsible in just about everything that he does.
Jesus.
I was really surprised by James Shaw to lose an election and then say, if the democratic will of the people is honoured, there will be violence. That's the sort of thing that I expect from fringe lunatic politicians, not from James Shaw, who's just had a really good result, who's generally regarded as a respectable person. So for him to be making that sort of veiled threat, actually saying that violence is justified if if you disagree with a political
That's
outcome.
not what James was
That's
saying.
absolutely outrageous. It's exactly what he said. It's unforgivable in my view, and I think
Don't
James
even
Shaw
look
should
at it.
retract that and say
God.
it's never acceptable to have violence. We will participate in a healthy, rational discussion about our constitutional future rather than make the kind of, not quite threats, but the kind of rhetoric that he's engaging in. Really astonished to hear that from James Shaw.
No,
and the Greens.
I just really need to be clear that James was not making any form of veiled threats, and to imply that is actually rather irresponsible. What he was saying is that if you look at the trajectory of those kinds of conversations and the type of rhetoric that tends to come forward from an oversimplified binary, which does divide people, then you need to look at the consequences that have occurred over the course of history.
Well, Australia's just had a very similar referendum. Now, I'm not aware that Australia's in a great deal of unrest.
I mean, you can talk to people on the ground and you'll hear that there was a huge amount of racism that came out as a result of that, and a huge amount of misunderstanding as well.
I suppose the question is, should you not do something? Should you not use a function of democracy just because
I absolutely think that we should use functions of democracy. What I'm saying is that the way to achieve that is not through a reductive binary referendum, which is presupposing that there's only two ways that this conversation can play out.
Well, I just think it's absolutely disgraceful.
Right.
James Shaw should be in favour of rational debates, not
and he is. The point that Greens remains is that we can have these conversations in a way that doesn't presuppose that there's a binary outcome.
Boom. All hail the Queen. I think that's where we finish.
David, look at me, you piece of shit.
Listen.
Bad David.
Cheryl, you said it so well earlier that, and this is evidence, that race relations, especially in a white country, primarily Pākehā country,
You can't do it.
Two things, cannot be decided by referendum. Referendum and will of the people is not always the correct thing to do. Sometimes the minor position is the correct thing to do. And finally, and always, I'll come back to this, the treaty is a contract between two parties, Māori and the Crown. It doesn't actually matter what Billy Bob wants from Timaru.
No.
He's not part of the contract. The contract is between Māori and the Crown. And I'll tell you what, if they go forward with this, I won't actually try and dramatise it up by saying violence or anything, but it won't go anywhere because there's no way any High Court will change or uphold or allow a contractual agreement between two parties to be changed by a third party. So it's actually a complete dog whistle. It's a waste of time. It will cause massive amounts of problems and division. These guys don't want to cause division. This will cause division. And then the High Court will strike it down if anything tries to get passed, because a third party can't change the rules for a contract between two other parties. Chewy.
We've already had a protest that shut down a major city. Absolutely paralysed the middle of Wellington.
Yep.
And what we learned from that is that these guys will talk to them or pander to them afterwards. So for him to pearl clutch about people going, well, maybe we have to take direct action. Like, a lot of them voted for him. You know, I think this is very true. If Seymour takes away our democratic voice, we use our democratic hands. I like that. I don't know if that's an original slogan or whether you've heard it somewhere. That is going in the vault. I love that.
And thank you for the $5 super chat. Very generous. We appreciate it. Greatly.
Absolutely.
If Seymour takes away our democratic voice, we use our democratic hands. I'd like some expansion on that. What does that mean? JC, speaking of super chats, thanks for the super sticker. And another one from JC. Create the divide, then offer to fix it. Classic right-wing move. We need to get ahead of this shit, increase awareness to this classic scam. It's also the idea, and Jon Stewart, when he used to run The Daily Show, used to point this out constantly and perfectly. He'd look at Fox News, and in the morning show, Fox and Friends, they'd make a report about an issue. And then in the afternoon show, they'd say, some outlets are reporting that, and the outlet was Fox News earlier. So they would make a narrative in the morning, that they would then report on in the afternoon that some outlets are saying. Some news outlets are reporting that, and it was them. So what happens in this situation is some people are creating this narrative that this has to happen and this is wrong, and then they create the division, and then they say, well, we can solve the division that we've created by having referendum. So they are the cause, and then they offer to be the solution. It's a clever but disgusting trick, Chewy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's this sort of stuff that is going to be our all-consuming job over the next 3 years. Like, if there's one thing that I hate saying that out loud as well. Like, if Luxon is going to be like Key, one of the things that Key was at least responsive to was public opinion and public blowback. So, he hopefully won't want to seem like the bad guy. I question whether he's going to be like that because of how much he stuck to his guns in the run up to the election. And some of that might be a tactic. You can't get off message, and he was very good at staying on message. But will that change when he's the prime minister that's got to front a stand up?
And that same question can be asked about about the tax cuts. I mean, they were challenged several times by reporters saying, if you can't get through the foreign buyers ban, what will you do then? And every time, whether it was Luxon or Nicola Willis, was like, we are giving the tax cuts. It's a guarantee. I will quit rather than do it. So that therefore means if they can't get those things through, as we've been warning of all the way through, the only other way you get money is either to borrow it or to cut. And it's probably a combination of them both. Maybe they borrow more. Maybe they sell off, or I guess sell off state assets to give tax cuts to wealthy landlords. Goodbye, Air New Zealand. Hello, landlord being able to claim their tax back. So who knows? Or the disabled, as we've already pointed out. The disabled is going to be down $2 billion over the next 4 years. Coincidentally, the exact amount that's been budgeted for tax cuts for landlords. Coincidentally.
Yeah, like I think there needs to be a few issues that need to be a red line for people that if they come anywhere near it, you've got to fight for it. Look at the French model. If they look at selling off these public houses that have just been built, if they look at privatizing our water, if they look at doing the stupid fucking referendum on our founding document, these need to be red lines where people decide, wow, it's not enough for me to have a moan on Facebook or come and listen to two beardy guys talk about how it's time to, what did I say the other day from Killer Mike? Plot, plan, strategize, organize,
that's
mobilize.
That's next month's t-shirt, those 3 words.